Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain had started sometime after dusk, soft at first, then heavier, blurring the road and swallowing the town signs into the dark. Nina's phone had no signal. Her GPS had frozen hours ago, stuck on a stretch of unnamed road somewhere between two towns she'd never heard of. She hadn't planned to take the scenic route, but one wrong turn on the highway had led her into a patch of forest so thick that it felt like driving through a tunnel carved from rotten roots. The forest eventually thinned into a clearing, but the relief was short-lived. The engine coughed, then sputtered, then died altogether. Steam hissed from under the hood. Nina sat in silence for a moment, watching the wipers sweep uselessly across the windshield. The road was empty. No houses. No lights. Just the sound of rain hammering the roof and a long stretch of black trees that seemed to lean closer with every heartbeat. She climbed out, boots sinking into the soaked gravel, and reached for her jacket in the back seat. The rain stung her cheeks as she pulled it over her shoulders. In the distance, past the bend in the road, she spotted the glow of an old sign swinging in the wind. Cresswell's Auto, it read. Half the letters were missing. She walked toward it. The service station had clearly been abandoned years ago. One of the garage doors was jammed open at an angle, revealing the hollowed-out remains of a car that had been gutted for parts. Broken glass crunched under her feet as she stepped into the office. Dust blanketed the counter. A fly buzzed lazily in the corner. But there was a voice. Not clear at first, just a cough from the far end of the garage. Then a scraping sound. A stool dragged across concrete. An old man in blue coveralls emerged from behind a row of rusted cabinets, as if he'd been sitting back there, waiting. His eyes were glassy. His skin was pale, loose like old wallpaper peeling away. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Car trouble?" he asked, voice flat. "Yeah," she replied. "I think it overheated. Do you have a phone I could use?" The man blinked slowly. "No phones work out here," he said. "But you can wait the night. There's a place up the hill. The Carver House. It's still open, more or less." "More or less." He didn't answer. Just handed her a small slip of paper with a sketched map, the ink smeared with grease. He pointed up the road, where the trees gathered thick again. "Follow the bend. Third turn. You'll see it." And just like that, he turned away, disappearing back into the garage like fog. Nina hesitated only a moment before heading toward the hill. The Carver house appeared suddenly. 1 minute there was only trees and storm and dark, and the next, the treetops parted and the silhouette of the house rose like a wound against the clouds. It was tall. Too tall. With sharp windows that looked like they belonged in a church built for mourning. The porch creaked even though she hadn't stepped on it yet, as if warning her off. The light above the door flickered dimly, powered by something that probably shouldn't have worked anymore. She raised a hand to knock, but didn't get the chance. The door opened on its own, just a few inches. Just enough to let her know she was expected. And then she heard it. A whisper. Her name. From deep inside. Nina. She froze. Every part of her wanted to step back. To return to the car. To wait until morning. But the cold had settled into her bones, and her feet seemed to carry her forward before her mind could catch up. The door creaked wider. Inside, the air was warm. Too warm. thick with the smell of burnt wood and something faintly sweet, like old flowers left to rot in a vase. The walls were covered in dark wood panels, and above the fireplace hung a portrait of a man with eyes far too detailed, too lifelike, staring down at her with a gaze that followed. There was no sign of a desk. No bell. No one standing to greet her. Just the sound of ticking. A grandfather clock at the end of the hallway, slow and deliberate. Its pendulum swung in time with the sound of her heartbeat. She took a step forward. The floor groaned beneath her. Then, another whisper. Nina, upstairs. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned to leave, but the door had closed behind her. Locked. She wasn't alone. Nina's fingers trembled as they grazed the doorknob. Cold metal. Unmoving. Locked. No sound came from the other side now. No rain. No wind. No whisper. Only the steady, breathless silence of a house that felt like it had been holding something in for years, and had just exhaled. She turned back toward the hallway. The clock at the far end let out a low chime. Not the usual bright bell. This was dull, almost muffled, like it had been struck underwater. It echoed once, then faded into the walls. There were no lights on, but a faint glow spilled from under a door upstairs. Faint and golden, like a candle behind old glass. It shouldn't have been comforting, but something in her chest tightened with the sense that going up was better than staying down here. She moved carefully. Each step on the staircase creaked louder than the last, as if the house needed to announce her presence with every inch of elevation. The wooden railing was smooth, worn down by too many hands. The air grew warmer as she climbed, but also heavier, not in temperature, but in feeling. Like walking deeper into a place that knew things it wasn't supposed to. At the top of the stairs, the hallway opened like a throat. 7 doors lined either side, there were mismatched, one peeling paint, another with deep claw-like gouges across the center. None of them were labeled, and none of them had handles that looked recently used. Except the last one on the left. It was open just a crack. Behind it, the golden glow pulsed slightly. Candlelight. Nina hesitated. And that's when she saw them. The eyes. Not real ones, not at first. But paintings. Dozens of them. Framed portraits lining the hallway walls. All black and white. All faded. Men. Women. Children. Some wearing clothes from different eras, as if the house had collected them across time. But each and every one of them had the same detail. Their eyes were vivid. In color. Green. Blue. Hazel. Even red. And they were all staring at her. She stepped backward instinctively, and knocked over a small table beside her. It hit the wall with a crash, and the sound seemed to echo longer than it should have. Then it got quiet again. Too quiet. She turned to the open door, and saw that it had swung open fully. The candle inside flickered, casting shadows along the floor. A small room. No furniture, just an antique twin bed in the center with clean sheets. White. Tucked neatly. A ceramic bowl on the nightstand. A worn book beside it, spine cracked with age. The window was shut, curtains pulled tight. At first, she thought she was alone. But then something moved in the corner. A chair. And someone was sitting in it. Nina froze. Her voice caught in her throat. She couldn't see the figure clearly, only the silhouette. Shoulders slumped. head tilted forward as if in thought or prayer. Hands folded in its lap. No motion. No breathing. The figure was completely still. Then, its head turned. Just slightly. Just enough to face her. She wanted to speak, to say sorry, to ask if this was the wrong room, to explain she was only here for shelter. But she couldn't. Because when the figure looked at her, its face was wrong. Not monstrous, but familiar. Her nose. Her lips. The shape of her jaw. It was her face. A reflection, but aged. Tired. Twisted by something unspoken. Its mouth opened slowly, and its voice came out, cracked like dried leaves. "You shouldn't have come." Nina stumbled back. Her heel hit the edge of the hallway, and she nearly lost balance. The door slammed shut in front of her, not by wind, but by force. The air pressure burst outward like something had exhaled from inside. She ran. Down the hallway. Past the paintings. Past their eyes that now glowed faintly, as if lit from behind. But the stairs were gone. Not broken. Gone. Where the staircase had been, there was only wall. Painted over. Seamless. Like it had never existed. She pounded her fist on it, heart hammering. And from behind the walls, deep inside the wood, she heard it again. A whisper. Not her name this time. Not one voice. But many. All at once. All guests, return. Nina backed away from the wall where the stairs had been, eyes wide, breath catching in her throat. Her hand reached instinctively for the wall, pressing against it, searching for seams, cracks, any indication that the staircase hadn't just vanished into the house's skin. But there was nothing. Just wallpaper, pale yellow, peeling in long strips, curling at the edges like it was trying to escape. It was impossible. She had just come up. She had walked these stairs. She turned, scanning the hallway again. The portraits still lined the walls, but something was different. Some of the frames had changed. One was missing entirely. Another, a photo that once showed an older woman, now showed only a chair. The eyes in the rest of the portraits were no longer colorful. They were closed. Nina felt her legs start to move before she even made the decision. She stumbled forward, pulse roaring in her ears, fingers grazing each doorknob as she passed, hoping for one, just one, to turn, to open, to offer a place to think, to breathe, to wake up from whatever kind of nightmare this was. The third door on the right gave way with a soft groan. It opened into a bedroom. Not like the first, this one was lived in. The bed was unmade, sheets crumpled and stained with dark patches she didn't want to investigate. A single oil lamp flickered on the dresser, its glow warm but dim, as if it could only survive in the room it knew. There were books on the floor. Scattered pages torn from their spines. A small table by the window with a cracked teacup, still full, though the liquid inside had gone black and still. And beside the window, hung low on the wall, was a mirror. Not a decorative one, not with a gilded frame or silver border, just a slab of aging glass held in place by tarnished nails. It leaned slightly, too heavy for its mount. And in it, Nina saw herself. But just for a second. Because the image blinked, and didn't. Her own reflection remained still, mouth slightly open, eyes wide and staring directly at her, not with fear, but with recognition. Her reflection didn't follow her movements. It simply watched. Like it was waiting. She stepped closer. So did the still version of herself. The closer she got, the more she noticed something wrong with the face. The details weren't sharp. The eyes were too wet. The lips too pale. And then the reflection whispered. But its mouth never moved. "You've been here before." Nina jerked back, heart leaping into her throat. The whisper didn't come from behind her. It came from the glass, deep inside it, like the sound of a memory surfacing. "I haven't," she said aloud, voice hoarse. But the glass said nothing more. She stepped away and turned to leave, but something caught her eye. On the far wall, behind the curtain of the room, was a mural. Not wallpaper, a full painting. And not modern. It was old, cracked in places, faded with time and damp, but clear enough to see the subject. It was the house. The same sloping roof. The same crooked porch. But this version was different. People were outside it. A crowd. Dozens of them. Children, women, men. All with their backs to the viewer, as if they were staring up at the building. Some pointed. Others looked frozen mid-motion. None of them had faces. All blurred. And in every window of the painted house, someone was watching from inside. Too many faces to count. All painted in with haunting precision, trapped behind the glass. The longer she stared, the more the painted house began to look like now. The curtain beside the mural shifted. Not from her movement, not from wind. From breath. Something behind it moved. Nina reached forward and pulled the curtain back in one quick motion, and saw the bare wall. Nothing. No one. But on the inside of the curtain, scrawled in black ink, was a name. Her name. Nina Grace Elliott. Room 3B, returning guest. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She hadn't told anyone her full name. She turned, and this time she ran. Back into the hallway. Back past the now dark paintings. The carpet below her feet seemed longer now, like the hallway had stretched while she was gone, the way bad dreams do when you try to escape. She passed a new door. One she hadn't seen before. It was open. Inside, the walls were covered in writing. Names etched into the plaster with what looked like fingernails. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Some faded. Some fresh. One was still wet. Nina leaned in and read the one closest to her face. I heard myself whisper from inside the walls. MG, 1962. The next. This house remembers everyone. LT, 1944. Then. She came back in my skin. I'm not me anymore. Nina G, 1999. Her legs buckled. That was her name. Her initials. And the year. 1999, the year she was born. Her breath came in ragged pulls. Someone had been here before. Someone who looked like her. She turned away, slamming the door shut and stumbling down the hall. But the hallway didn't end. It twisted. It bent. And the ceiling above her stretched higher, wider, bending into arches lined with candle sconces that lit by themselves as she passed. The air felt colder. Older. Her footsteps began to echo, not just in the hall, but from behind her. Someone was walking. Mimicking her pace. She turned. No one. But the echoes kept going. She walked faster. The echoes walked faster. She ran. And from far behind, a voice rose up. Not whispered now. Clear. Feminine. Wrong. I remember you. Nina stopped. Dead in her tracks. And from just a few feet away, from one of the closed doors, came a sound. A slow, dragging scrape. Like someone's fingernails across wood. And then, the click of a latch. The doorknob began to turn. The doorknob kept turning, inch by inch, slowly, deliberately. It clicked with each shift like a clock ticking towards something inevitable. Nina stepped back, breath caught halfway up her chest, her heels brushing the frayed edge of the hallway carpet. She had nowhere to run. The hallway behind her had collapsed into shadow, thick, oily black that seemed to move when she blinked. And now the door before her groaned open. At first, she saw only darkness. Then a single footstep landed on the threshold. Bare. Pale. Human. Another followed. And then it emerged. It was her. Or something wearing her shape. But not the Nina of today, not the one soaked from the rain, heart pounding with fear. This version looked wrong. Too clean. Too calm. Skin waxy. Hair dry and perfectly brushed over her shoulder. She wore a faded nightgown, the kind Nina hadn't worn since she was 10. Her lips were slightly parted, like she was just about to speak but never had the chance. Her eyes, Nina's eyes, were wide and still. Too still. Who are you? Nina whispered. The thing tilted its head. The exact same motion Nina made when confused. Perfectly mirrored. It didn't blink. Instead, it took a step toward her, and the floor creaked like it might collapse beneath them both. The thing raised a hand and pointed toward her chest, not in threat, but in something colder. Recognition. I've waited so long, it said. Its voice was breathy. Hollow. Like wind passing through a keyhole. Nina backed away, shaking her head. You're not real. You came back, the thing whispered. You left me here. But I kept your place warm. Its hand dropped to its side. I dreamed your life, it added, voice now curling into a soft, childlike lilt. I saw what you saw. I was the echo in your mirror. The breath behind the glass. But now. It stepped closer. You're here. Nina spun and bolted back down the hallway. The lights behind her sputtered out one by one. The thing didn't run. It simply walked, but somehow, the echo of its steps stayed close, always just behind her. She reached another door and threw it open. This room was massive. Wrongly massive. It couldn't possibly fit inside the house. The ceilings arched up into black, and the walls were lined with stacked furniture, beds, desks, chairs, all heaped into towering shapes like altars. At the center of the room was a mirror. No frame. No backing. Just a sheet of glass suspended upright by unseen hands. As she stepped inside, her reflection stepped forward. But this time, it wasn't her. Not even the twisted, pale version from the hallway. This reflection looked older, decades older. Aged into her 60s, maybe 70s. Her hair silver. Wrinkles carving deep lines across her face. But the eyes, they were alive. Scared. Mouth moving in slow, silent speech. Get out. Nina reached toward the mirror, and her fingers passed through it. Not onto glass. But into air. Cold, dry air. She stepped forward and fell into the mirror. She landed hard on her side, grass scratching her arms. The air was damp and smelled of pine. A forest. A real forest. She stood slowly. No house. No hallway. Just trees. Wind. But in the distance, she saw something glowing through the fog. A street lamp. And then, a figure. An old man. The mechanic. He was standing beside an old rusted truck, staring at her with wide, glassy eyes. Just like before. Except something was different. The truck wasn't parked. It was crashed. Smashed head-on into a tree. Steam hissed from the hood. And there, through the cracked windshield, was her reflection again, her face staring out in shock and pain. There was blood on her forehead. Nina stumbled back. No. That's not real. That's not real. The mechanic turned his head toward her slowly, and his mouth opened in a slow, mechanical way, jaw unhinging too far. She never left, he said. She died on that road. You're the one who came after. She turned and ran. Through the trees. Through the thick, coiling fog. Branches tore at her arms. Roots snagged her boots. She didn't know how long she ran, maybe minutes, maybe hours, until she crashed through a wall of brambles and found herself back in the hallway. Same peeling wallpaper. Same cold floorboards. Same flickering candlelight. She turned behind her, no forest. Just another door, closed and humming softly, as if breathing. Nina leaned against the wall, heart pounding, sweat on her brow. A quiet voice whispered from overhead. Every guest lives here forever, eventually. She looked up. The ceiling above her pulsed. Something was moving inside it. Crawling. Slithering. And then, slowly, a thin crack formed along the plaster, and a single drop of blood fell to the floor by her feet. The single drop of blood landed with a soft patter on the floorboards near Nina's boot. She stared at it, frozen, heart thudding so violently in her chest she could barely breathe. The dark red stain sank slowly into the wood, disappearing into the cracks like the house was thirsty for it. She didn't move. Above her, the crack in the ceiling widened. Just slightly. More blood followed. Drip. Drip. Steady now, like a leaking pipe in some unseen attic above her. But there had been no upper floor, not really. Just the hallway. The doors. The stretching walls. Rooms that grew and shrank on their own whims. Nothing in the Carver house obeyed structure or space. She stepped back from the blood, looking up. Something shifted in the ceiling. Something long. Something heavy. She could see the outline of it, a form pressing outward against the cracked plaster. Limbs? Or were they roots? Then the whisper returned, almost inaudible, almost like a thought not entirely her own. The house has a memory. And it is hungry. Nina stumbled away from the wall, eyes darting left, then right. None of the doors were familiar anymore. Not the one with the scratched brass knob. Not the black wood one, with symbols etched into the frame that looked like they had been carved in desperation. Not the tall, white one that seemed to sway slightly, even though there was no wind. Each of them pulsed faintly now. Alive. Breathing. Watching. She didn't want to open any of them. But staying still wasn't an option either. The ceiling crack had spread to the far corner now, and the dripping had turned into a slow, sticky stream. Somewhere behind her, floorboards groaned, not from her movement, but from weight. Heavy. Crawling. Approaching. She darted toward the door with no handle. Her fingers found a small groove in the frame, just enough to pry it open. It creaked, reluctantly, and beyond it, darkness. Pitch black. A different kind of dark. Not the absence of light, but the presence of something else. And then she heard it. Breathing. Not hers. From inside the room. Steady, slow, wheezing, like lungs filled with dust. Her hand shook as she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, thumb shaking over the flashlight icon. Somehow it still had battery. She tapped it. The light cut through the dark, only a narrow cone, but enough. And what it landed on made her stomach twist. A hospital bed. A real one. Rusting metal frame. Peeling white paint. Stained sheets pulled tight. Medical wires snaked down its side, though they connected to nothing. A table sat nearby with old prescription bottles, the labels worn blank. On the far wall, an four stand leaned like a tree struck by lightning. And in the bed, someone lay completely still. She stepped forward, every part of her screaming not to. The figure was frail. Thin limbs. Eyes closed. But it was her. Again. Older. Even older than the version in the mirror. Pale lips. Chest rising in slow, struggling breaths. The face was unmistakable. She stared, unable to move. And then, without opening its eyes, the body in the bed whispered. "You're late." Nina stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The lights in the room flickered once, not her phone light, but somewhere above, like old fluorescent bulbs blinking to life in a forgotten basement. And then the machine beside the bed, one she hadn't noticed before, let out a long, flat beat. The woman in the bed exhaled. And didn't inhale again. The breath lingered in the air like a fog. And that's when Nina saw something else. Carved into the metal frame of the hospital bed, scratched so deep the words had rusted into the surface. "The first time I died was here." She backed out of the room, phone shaking in her hand, light swinging wildly across the hallway. The door shut behind her. And she didn't close it. The handleless door sealed itself with a soft click, as if it was satisfied. Like it had finally shown her what it needed to. The hallway had changed again. Longer. The carpet now completely soaked, each step squelching with unseen moisture. The portraits were gone, replaced with windows. But no light came through them. Only fog. Thick, suffocating fog that clung to the glass like breath on cold mirror. She peered through one and saw something moving outside. A tall figure. Thin. Faceless. Wearing a black coat. It stood perfectly still at the edge of the tree line, visible only when the fog thinned for half a second. And in its hand was a lantern. Dim, flickering. Its flame moved rhythmically, not swaying with wind, but pulsing like a heartbeat. And then the figure turned. And began walking toward the house. Nina gasped and stepped away from the window. From another room nearby, she heard a sound. Soft. Like someone humming. A woman's voice. Old, slow, like a lullaby from a language no one spoke anymore. Drawn forward by fear or some deeper instinct, Nina moved toward it, reaching a cracked wooden door that stood barely ajar. She pushed it open with 2 fingers. The room inside was round. Not square like the others. A study, maybe. Shelves lined the curved walls, each crammed with books so old their spines had rotted. Pages curled. Moths fluttered toward the lanterns above. At the center of the room sat a rocking chair. And in it, a woman. Back to Nina. Gray hair in a long braid. A wool blanket over her legs. She rocked slowly, back and forth, humming that same melody. Nina didn't speak. The woman did. "You remember the fire, don't you?" she asked. "The one you started." Nina's mouth opened, but she didn't know what to say. She hadn't started a fire. Had she? The woman turned just her head, revealing only one eye, and it was blind, clouded with gray. "You shouldn't have come back," she rasped. And then she stood. Slowly. Unfolding like something that had waited too long in one position. And when she turned fully to face Nina, her face wasn't human. Not anymore. No eyes. No mouth. Just smooth, stretched skin and a hollow sound escaping her throat like a scream muffled inside glass. Nina ran. Back into the hallway. But the house was shifting again. Rooms sliding past her. Walls bending. Doors slamming shut ahead of her, one by one. And from deep inside the walls, that same chant began to rise. "She's returned. She's returned. She's returned." A final door remained. One door. Black iron. Cold to the touch. She reached for it. And behind her, from somewhere impossibly close, the thing that wore her name screamed. "You belong to me." Nina grabbed the iron doorknob. It was freezing, like grabbing bare metal in winter, and it burned her skin with the cold. She didn't care. Behind her, footsteps pounded down the hall. Not quick ones. Not like running. These were deliberate. Heavy. Purposeful. As if whatever was chasing her didn't need to hurry because it knew she had nowhere left to go. The knob turned. The door swung open. And without looking back, Nina dove through. It slammed shut behind her. Darkness swallowed her whole. Not the quiet kind. The kind that presses in, thick, endless, suffocating. She blinked. Nothing changed. No shapes. No outlines. No ground beneath her. No ceiling. No walls. Just black. Even the air felt wrong. Thin. Artificial. Like breathing in something pretending to be oxygen. Her heartbeat filled the space, pulsing in her ears, louder than her thoughts. And then came the sound. A click. One small, metallic click. She turned toward it, or at least she thought she did. There was no sense of direction here. But another click followed. Then a rattle. Like keys jangling. Then, a soft giggle. Childlike. Distant. Wrong. She backed away, or forward, she couldn't tell. Her feet touched nothing. The floor was gone. She was standing, but there was no resistance beneath her. Like being held in place by strings she couldn't feel. Another giggle. Closer now. Then, a flicker. Far ahead, or below, or inside her. A faint light. A warm one. A candle flame. Just one. It hovered in the dark, not casting light outward but burning in place, as if it existed in a different layer than everything else around it. She moved toward it. It didn't grow closer. She walked faster. Still the same distance. She ran. Nothing changed. And then a voice, soft and ancient, came from the direction of the flame. You opened a door not meant to open. This place remembers hunger. Nina stopped. Her hands shook. What are you? The voice didn't reply at first. The candle flickered once, then twice. And then the voice returned. Not what? Where? This room is the house's mouth. And you brought it your name. The flame flared up, suddenly revealing a shape behind it. A key. Hanging in midair. Old. Iron. Coated in rust. And something was written on its shaft in faint etching. Entry equals memory. As she stared at it, the air shifted. And a second light ignited. Then another. And another. Dozens of candles, now lighting up in a slow wave around her. Each one revealing something new. She wasn't alone. They were everywhere. Figures. Standing still. Unmoving. All of them her. Different versions. Some older. Some younger. Some dressed in clothes she'd worn once, others in things she'd never seen before. One had a stitched scar across her forehead. Another's eyes were gouged out, empty sockets dripping black. They stared at her. Every one of them. Not blinking. And they spoke, all at once, in the same whispering tone that had haunted her since the first night she stepped into the Carver house. You left us here. We waited. Now you stay. She stumbled back, and a hand grabbed her ankle. She screamed. The floor, or whatever passed for it, opened like a trapdoor. Something below pulled at her leg. She kicked, twisted, fell, down into blackness once again. When she landed, it was hard. Solid. She lay there, dazed, groaning, cheek pressed to cold stone. Stone. Actual floor. Real texture. Her hands scrambled across it. Rough. Dusty. Coated in grit. She sat up slowly and looked around. This place was different. A basement. Or a cellar. The walls were made of crumbling brick, and wooden support beams lined the ceiling. Candlelight flickered from wall sconces, casting long, twitching shadows. On the far side of the room was a chair. A single wooden chair. And on it, a man. Or, what used to be a man. He was bound with ropes around his wrists and ankles, slumped forward, head lolled to one side. His face was obscured by a cloth sack soaked through with something dark and long dried. But he breathed. Shallow. Ragged. Barely alive. Nina stepped closer. And the breathing stopped. She froze. Then, in a slow, jerking motion, the man raised his head. The sack shifted slightly, as if he could still see her through it. And then he whispered, in a voice that was hoarse and barely human. She'll take your face when you sleep. Nina stepped back. But his voice gained strength. You're the last one. The one she needs. The others. He began to tremble violently, ropes creaking under the force. She's wearing them now. The sack over his head ripped open, and there was no face beneath it. Just flesh. Raw and smooth. As if something had peeled his identity clean off. From the darkness behind him, a figure stepped forward. A woman. Hair long. Dress torn. And where her face should have been, Nina's. A perfect copy. Her own voice spoke from its mouth. "You're almost ready." Nina ran. A staircase appeared in the far wall, and she didn't question it. She climbed. Each step groaned, warped, and splintered under her feet. Behind her, the sound of dragging. Scraping. As if fingernails clawed up the stairs, chasing her. She burst through the door at the top and slammed it behind her, collapsing to her knees. She was back in the hallway. But it was changed again. Now it was old. Abandoned. Cobwebs covered every corner. The air reeked of mold and soot. Walls had rotted away in places, revealing beams and insulation beneath. And on the wall beside her, scrawled in charcoal, were 6 words. "If you sleep here, you stay." And beneath it, "Room 7, she waits inside." Nina turned slowly. Room 7's door was wide open. A faint light pulsed within. And something inside that room was whispering her dreams back to her. Room 7's door stood open like a mouth waiting to close. It was taller than the others. Narrower. Its frame splintered in places, as if something had clawed to get out. The brass room number above it had rusted to the point of barely being readable, and behind the threshold, a flickering amber light pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. The whispering grew clearer now. And what shook Nina to her core wasn't the sound of it, but the words. Because they were hers. Childhood fears. Private thoughts. Things she had whispered into pillows as a little girl when she was too afraid to sleep. Things no one should have known. Now, that voice, her voice, echoed softly through the crack in the door. "I saw her in the closet. If I close my eyes, she climbs out. If I breathe too loud, she knows I'm awake." Nina's hands trembled as she took a step toward the door. The house had gone quiet again, not silent, but expectant. Like it had drawn in a long breath and was waiting to see what she would do. Every instinct screamed to run. But there was nowhere left to go. She stepped into room 7. It was cold. But not from temperature, from memory. From atmosphere. From something deeper than weather. The room was wide, with a ceiling that sloped upward like an attic. Cobwebs trailed from rafter to rafter. The floor was covered in old toys, a spinning top, a stuffed rabbit missing one eye, a row of wooden blocks spelling out her name. Her real name. Nina. The walls were lined with drawings, childlike scribbles done in black crayon. At first they seemed random. Circles. Faces. Trees. But as she stepped closer, Nina realized what she was looking at. Every drawing was a scene. One showed a little girl standing in a hallway, staring at a closed door. Another showed a woman lying in a bed, something rising from underneath the mattress. Another, drawn over and over, showed a house on a hill, smoke curling from its chimney. But the smoke wasn't gray. It was black. Thick. Almost alive. A small child-sized chair sat in the center of the room, facing a cracked mirror. And seated in that chair, turned away from her, was a girl. Hair long and tangled. Wearing a faded blue dress. Feet dangling just above the floor. The girl wasn't moving. But she was humming. And the tune. Nina knew it. It was the lullaby her grandmother used to sing. The one she hadn't heard since she was 5. Her voice caught in her throat. "Hello," Nina said softly. The girl stopped humming. She didn't turn around. But her voice emerged, clear and strange. You left me in the dark. Nina stepped closer, her boots crunching over the forgotten toys. I don't know you, she whispered. The girl tilted her head. You do. Her voice was colder now. Heavier. It filled the room unnaturally. You buried me. And now the house remembers. And finally, the girl turned. Nina's breath hitched. It wasn't a child's face. Not really. It was her own, but twisted. Youthful, yes, but the eyes were hollow. The skin was pale and cracking like old porcelain. The mouth was smiling, but wrong. Too wide. Too satisfied. The girl lifted one hand and pointed to the mirror. Nina looked. And saw a reflection that wasn't hers. It was the hallway behind her. Except now the walls were covered in crawling things. Dozens of long, black fingers reaching out from the seams of the wallpaper. Faces pressed against the wood beneath, trying to push through. The ceiling bulged, like something massive was trying to squeeze its way into the narrow corridor. And there, standing at the end of the hallway in the reflection, was the real her. Not the child. Not the twisted version. Her. Watching. Screaming silently. Beating against the inside of the mirror glass. Trapped. The little girl's voice rang in her ears, louder now. She took your place when you were 6. You forgot. But we didn't. You've been living her life. Nina's legs gave out and she dropped to her knees. No. She remembered it now. The dream. From when she was a child. She'd told no one. Ever. Waking up in a room that wasn't hers. A house with too many corners. Shadows that whispered. She remembered something pulling her into the closet. A hand. Small and cold. She told herself it was a nightmare. A single dream. But it wasn't. She had gone missing for 3 days when she was 6. She'd always thought it was a mistake. That her parents had overreacted. That she'd wandered off into the woods and been found miles away. But that wasn't what happened. The girl in the chair smiled wider now. You're just a borrowed thing. And it's time to give her back. Nina looked again at the mirror. The version of her trapped inside was growing desperate, pounding, sobbing. Behind that reflection, the hallway was beginning to collapse. The floor breaking apart. Walls twisting. A flood of shadow pouring down like smoke underwater. And from deep within it came a voice, not the girl's. A different one. Older. Lower. You opened every door, it said. Now you belong to us. The floor beneath her began to sink. Like quicksand. The toys rattled. The blocks spelling her name scattered, rearranging into new letters. N-I-G-H-T. N-O-T. Y-O-U. The girl stood. And as she walked toward Nina, her body shimmered. Changed. Aged. Now she was Nina's age. Then older. Then older still. She walked in a loop, growing with every step, until she became the same figure from the hospital bed. Breathing heavily. Eyes sunken. The final version stepped forward. And reached for Nina's face. Nina screamed and pushed away, crawling backward toward the wall. And then, she saw it. A hole. Not a doorway. A circular hole in the floor. barely wide enough for her body. Carved into the boards, like something had drilled through every layer of the house and left an escape route for someone desperate enough. She didn't think. She jumped in. The world flipped. Inverted. Sound fell away. Gravity bent sideways. And then, silence. Cold, heavy silence. She landed with a thud. On tile. Bright white tile. Too clean. Too sterile. The lights above her buzzed. She blinked. And sat up. And saw mirrors. Endless rows of them. A room of mirrors, stretching in every direction. And in every reflection, different versions of her. Screaming. Smiling. Sleeping. Crying. Each one locked behind glass, pounding with identical hands. But only her reflection, the real her, stood still. And behind her, in that one perfect reflection, a door appeared. Red. With gold hinges. And from the other side of it, she heard knocking. Slow. Deliberate. Getting louder. And louder. And louder. The knocking echoed through the mirrored chamber, each thud reverberating like distant thunder pressed against glass. It didn't come from around her, not from the white-tiled room she stood in, but only from one place. Her reflection. Not the cracked, screaming versions in the other panes. Not the crying or smiling or dead-eyed variants scattered across the infinite rows of mirrors. Only her own reflection stood in front of that red door with golden hinges. The others stayed frozen in their moments, expressions stitched in place like dolls left too long in the attic. Nina stared at the red door behind her mirror self. The gold was too polished. Too bright for this place. The door didn't match the tile, the light, or the endless reflections. It stood in complete defiance of everything around it, as if it didn't belong in this world. The knocking continued. Louder now. 3 slow hits. Then 3 more. Each one stronger than the last. Her reflection turned around to look at the door behind her. Nina didn't. She couldn't. She wasn't facing it. The door, if it existed in this space, was behind her. But she felt it. That heavy pressure in the air. The way light bends in a room before a storm hits. The invisible static crawling along the back of her neck. Something wanted her to turn. But something deeper, more primal, screamed that if she did, she'd never leave. The reflection lifted its hand and knocked once on the red door. Just once. A test. The knocking on the other side stopped. Everything went still. Then, slowly, the door handle behind her reflection began to turn. No hand touched it. No one turned it. It simply rotated, inch by slow inch, with a long, creaking groan that rattled through Nina's chest. Her reflection's eyes widened. She shook her head. But it was too late. The door in the mirror swung open. And a hand reached out. Not a human one. Thin. Gray. Bones stretched unnaturally long beneath pale skin. Fingers too many. Too sharp. Nails like shards of stained glass. It reached forward and grabbed her reflection by the throat. Nina screamed. Her reflection did not. Its mouth opened in silence. The mirrors around her flickered like old TV screens. Some shattered. Others melted. The light above her buzzed violently and then died. Darkness rushed in. And something else did, too. Nina bolted blindly through the tiled room. No direction. Just movement. Just escape. Mirrors shattered as she passed, shards slicing across her arms and legs, drawing blood. But she didn't stop. She ran until the floor shifted beneath her. The tiles rippled. Like water. She fell. Through the floor. When she opened her eyes, she was sitting in a chair. A real one. Wooden. Worn. Her wrists were tied. Not tight, just enough that it took a moment for panic to set in. The room was dimly lit. A single bulb swayed gently overhead, casting slow, dizzying shadows on the walls. Dust motes drifted through the air like falling ash. The room had no corners, only darkened edges where the walls blurred into shadow. Across from her sat a man. Middle-aged. Eyes sunken and ringed with bruises, like he hadn't slept in years. He wore a black coat, buttoned wrong. His hands were folded neatly on his lap. And he was watching her. Calmly. Patiently. "I know you," she said. Her voice was rough. He nodded slowly. "You don't remember me yet," he said. "But you will." "Where am I?" The man's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite sorrow. "This is the threshold," he said. "Between memory and possession." "What does that mean?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "When the house takes you, it doesn't do it all at once. It wears you. For years. Quietly. A breath here. A skipped heartbeat there. Until what's left of you is just enough to know something's wrong. Just enough to scream from inside." Nina's throat tightened. She remembered the reflection. Screaming behind the glass. She whispered, "That was me." He nodded. "One of you. One of many. Some stay behind. Others are sent out. You were sent out. Why? To bring the rest back." Nina shook her head. "I didn't bring anyone back." He paused. Then slowly stood. And gestured toward the far wall, where a window opened that hadn't been there before. Through it, she saw the outside. Not forest. Not fog. A road. And headlights. A car. Her car. She was inside it, at the wheel. Driving through the storm. The wipers brushed rain away rhythmically. She was humming. Calm. Eyes forward. The version of her outside the house. Then, a flicker. Something moved in the back seat. A shape. Something unseen but present. And then her car passed a figure on the roadside. Nina gasped. It was the mechanic. But not standing. Lying. His body slumped. Lifeless. Flashing red and blue lights in the distance. Her car didn't stop. She drove past, unaware. "Wait," Nina said. "That's not how it happened." The man beside her stepped away from the window. "No," he said. "It's how it always happens. The house rearranges the memories. So you come back confused. Doubting. Easier to mold." Nina's voice trembled. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." Then he leaned close. And whispered in her ear. "You just have to sleep." The bulb above flickered. The shadows shifted. The ropes around her wrists vanished, not loosened. Gone. like they'd never existed. And the room changed. Tiles replaced wood. The light became a candle. She was back in her childhood bedroom. Exactly as it had been the night she vanished at 6. Same posters. Same bed. Same stuffed rabbit on the pillow. The closet door was open. Only a crack. She could hear breathing from inside. But not just breathing. Her own voice. "I'm not ready." Then a whisper from something deeper. "You were never yours to begin with." Nina turned slowly. And saw herself standing in the doorway. Not the mirror version. Not the child. But another version. Smiling calmly. Holding something in her hand. A small, red key. It glowed slightly in the candlelight. And it looked hot. The other Nina placed it on the dresser. Then stepped back into the darkness. Without speaking again. Nina stared at the key. And the closet door creaked open another inch. Nina's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the small, red key resting on the dresser. It shimmered faintly under the dim candlelight, almost pulsing, as if alive. Her fingers itched to reach out and grab it, but a deep instinct warned her to stay still, to not touch anything, to not disturb the fragile silence in the room. The closet door creaked wider. From inside, the shadows seemed to ripple like liquid. She could hear the faintest of whispers, not words she could make out, but an undercurrent of something old and dangerous, something that had been waiting patiently in the darkness. Nina's gaze flicked between the key and the closet. Her heart hammered in her chest, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the feeling of being hunted. A voice, soft, cold, and undeniably familiar, breathed from the closet. "Will you stay with me?" Nina's body trembled. She took a slow, trembling step backward. "No," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I won't." But the voice pressed on, wrapping around her like a silken thread tightening its hold. "You belong here. With me. You can't leave. Not now." She turned fully toward the closet, the candle flame flickering wildly, casting monstrous shadows that danced along the cracked wallpaper. The whisper became a chant, a slow, hypnotic pull. "Stay. Stay. Stay." Suddenly, a cold gust slammed the door shut. The room plunged into darkness. Nina gasped, clutching at the dresser to steady herself. The key was gone. Her eyes struggled to adjust, but the candlelight had vanished, extinguished by a breath she couldn't hear. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a gathering storm. And then, from the depths of the darkness, a faint, glowing light flickered. The key. It floated in the air, spinning slowly, beckoning. Nina hesitated, then stepped forward, reaching out. Her fingers brushed the cold metal. Instantly, a searing pain shot through her hand, burning like fire, yet numb like ice. She pulled back with a gasp. The key pulsed brighter, illuminating the room with an eerie red glow. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening. Suddenly, the closet door creaked open again, wider this time, revealing a black void. From within it, a cold wind rushed out, carrying 1,000 whispered names. Nina's skin crawled. The voice spoke again, this time from all around her. "You took what wasn't yours. You forgot what you owe. You opened the door." Nina stumbled back toward the bed. Her reflection appeared in the broken mirror on the wall, but it was distorted, fractured, a kaleidoscope of fear and despair. The fractured reflection mouthed words silently. "Sleep. Stay. Forever. Her eyes locked with her reflections. A single tear traced down her cheek. The key floated closer to her. She had a choice. Take the key. Unlock the closet. Face what waited inside. Or run. But where could she run? The house had already claimed her. And the whispers were waiting. Nina's fingers trembled as she reached for the floating key, the eerie red glow pulsing with an almost heartbeat rhythm. The burning sensation on her skin was fading, replaced by a cold numbness that spread up her arm like creeping frost. She hesitated, caught between terror and the desperate need for answers. The whispers swirled louder now, pressing against her mind, weaving threads of doubt and fear that clawed at her sanity. Unlock. Remember. Belong. She gritted her teeth and snatched the key from the air. It was heavier than it looked, cold and slick as if coated in ice. Behind her, the closet door groaned open further, revealing a dark staircase spiraling downward into oblivion. Nina swallowed hard, her breath fogging the air. She had no choice but to descend. Step by slow step, she climbed down the narrow staircase, the walls closing around her like a suffocating tunnel. The air grew colder, damp with the scent of earth and decay. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a vast chamber lit only by the faint, unnatural glow of phosphorescent moss clinging to stone walls. This was no ordinary cellar. The chamber was carved from ancient rock, rough and jagged, like the inside of a buried cave. In the center stood a stone altar. On it lay a book, bound in cracked black leather, edges frayed and stained. Nina approached cautiously, the key still clutched tightly in her hand. She reached out and opened the book. The pages were filled with symbols that shifted and twisted, impossible to read. But then the words began to form, as if the book was alive, rewriting itself for her. She who enters the house with the blood of the lost will feed the hunger or be consumed by it. A cold wind swept through the chamber, carrying with it the faintest sound of a lullaby, the same one from the girl in room 7. Suddenly, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Tall. Gaunt. Draped in tattered robes that seemed woven from night itself. The face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but the eyes gleamed, ancient, endless pits of black. You hold the key, the figure whispered, voice like dry leaves rustling in a graveyard. Nina's heart pounded. Who are you? The figure extended a skeletal hand. The keeper of doors. The watcher of thresholds. The one who waits for those who lose their way. Nina stepped back, trembling. What does the house want from me? The keeper smiled, or at least the movement beneath the hood suggested it. It wants what it always wants, a soul to tether, a life to borrow, a name to whisper into the dark. The chamber walls began to pulse, breathing like a living beast. You opened the doors of memory and fear, the keeper said. Now you must choose, feed the hunger, or be devoured. Nina's mind reeled. The house, the endless shifting, the whispers, the reflections, it wasn't just a place. It was a being. A predator. A trap. And she was caught. She looked down at the key in her hand. The weight of all the lost souls, the twisted versions of herself, the girl in the chair, the woman in the bed, bore down on her. And the whispers rose again, chanting in a terrible harmony. Stay. 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 Nina closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped forward toward the altar. Nina's fingers trembled as they hovered over the ancient book. The words on the page shimmered, alive with a terrible power, the same power that seemed to breathe through the walls of the chamber, pulsing with a slow, hungry rhythm. The keeper of doors stood silent behind her, a shadow wrapped in darkness, waiting patiently. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and decay. It filled her lungs like a poison, and yet, somehow, she could not tear herself away. Her eyes scanned the moving words again, trying to make sense of the curse that bound her here. The house did not just hunger for bodies or souls. It wanted memories, the most precious fragments of life itself. Feed the hunger, or be devoured, the phrase repeated endlessly in her mind, echoing the faint chant that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath her feet. A cold sweat broke out across her skin. She thought of the lost versions of herself, the child in the chair, the woman in the hospital bed, the reflection trapped behind the glass. They were fragments of memories swallowed by the house, trapped in its endless labyrinth. And now, she was offered a terrible choice. She could surrender. Offer herself willingly. Become another whisper in the walls. Or fight. But to fight the house, she had to understand it. The key pulsed like a heartbeat in her hand. Her fingers curled tightly around it. Suddenly, the chamber walls shuddered violently, as if the house itself was alive and aware of her hesitation. The keeper of doors stepped forward, lowering the hood to reveal a face that was neither old nor young, human nor something else. The eyes burned with an unholy light, piercing through Nina's soul. "The door to your memories lies beyond this chamber," he said, voice like gravel scraping stone. "But the path is treacherous. One wrong step, and you will be lost forever in the house's embrace." Nina swallowed hard. She had no choice. She nodded. The keeper motioned toward a narrow archway at the far end of the chamber. Beyond it, she could see the faint flicker of candlelight. Taking a deep breath, Nina stepped through the arch. The air grew colder still. She found herself in a long corridor lined with doors. Hundreds of them. Each door was different, some ornate and gilded, others plain and worn. Some hung slightly ajar, others were sealed tight with ancient locks. The whispers returned, soft and urgent. "Choose carefully." She reached out and touched one of the doors. It swung open silently. Inside was a room filled with photographs. Old black and white images of her family, parents, grandparents, even herself as a baby. The pictures seemed to move, shifting subtly as if alive. A sudden realization struck her: this was a room of memories. A vault of moments long forgotten. She stepped inside. But the door slammed shut behind her. The photographs began to swirl around her like a tornado of faces and moments. Voices echoed, laughter, cries, whispered promises. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the center of the room. A young woman, beautiful, serene. It was her mother. Only not quite. Her eyes were hollow, her smile a mask. "Why did you leave me?" the woman asked softly. Nina's heart broke. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I didn't know." The figure's smile faded. "You abandoned us." The photographs darkened. The voices grew louder. Nina felt herself pulled into the swirling storm of images. She screamed, but it was swallowed by the cacophony. And then she was falling. Falling through memories and shadows. Until she landed on cold stone again. Nina's body hit the cold stone floor with a heavy thud. The air around her was thick, stale, carrying a chill that seeped deep into her bones. She lay still for a moment, the echo of the fall ringing in her ears. When she finally forced herself to sit up, she realized she was in a cavernous chamber, far larger than the ones before. Dim torchlight flickered from sconces along the rough stone walls, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghosts. The air smelled faintly of earth and rot. Somewhere deep in the darkness, water dripped, slow, patient, endless. Nina's head throbbed, but she pushed herself to her feet. She scanned the room, her eyes catching on something that made her stomach twist. Dozens of old mirrors stood against the walls, cracked and fogged, each reflecting a twisted version of herself. Some mirrors showed a younger Nina, smiling and carefree. Others showed a frightened child crying silently. One mirror reflected a hollow-eyed woman screaming in silence. But in each reflection, her eyes seemed to follow her, pleading, accusing, desperate. A whisper began low and soft, rising from the shadows. "You cannot escape the house. You belong to us." Nina's heart pounded. The keeper of doors appeared suddenly, stepping from the shadows like a wraith. "Each mirror is a memory, a fragment of your soul the house has claimed," he said. "The house does not forget, but it does not forgive." Nina swallowed hard, gripping the red key tightly. "Why me?" she asked. "Why me, and not the others?" The keeper's eyes darkened. "Because you opened the door. You broke the seal that held the house's hunger at bay." Suddenly, the mirrors cracked further, tiny fractures spreading like spiderwebs. One mirror shattered completely, glass spraying like shards of ice. From the broken mirror stepped a figure, a version of Nina, but distorted, twisted by fear and despair. Her eyes were black holes, her mouth twisted into a cruel smile. The twisted Nina lunged. Nina stumbled back, barely dodging the attack. They circled each other, two halves of the same soul, each struggling for control. The whispered chant grew louder. "Stay. Stay. Stay." Nina felt a pull inside her, like a tide dragging her toward the shadows. She screamed, fighting the darkness clawing at her mind. And then, she remembered the key. With trembling hands, she held it out toward the twisted figure. The distorted Nina recoiled, screaming in rage and fear. The mirrors began to glow. Light spilled from the cracks, washing over the chamber like a tide of dawn. The twisted figure shattered like glass, dissolving into shadows. The chamber grew silent. The keeper nodded slowly. "You have passed the test. But the house is patient. And the hunger never ends." Nina looked at the red key, now warm in her palm. "Where do I go from here?" The keeper gestured toward a heavy iron door at the far end of the chamber. Beyond it, a faint light spilled. "The way out." Nina took a step forward. But the whispers returned, soft as a breath. "You belong to us." She swallowed hard, heart pounding, and reached for the door handle. Nina's fingers curled around the cold iron handle, slick with unseen moisture. A faint pulse vibrated through the metal, as if the door itself had a heartbeat. Her breath hitched, eyes locked on the heavy barrier between her and the unknown beyond. The whispers from the shadows faded to a haunting silence, replaced only by the slow creak of ancient hinges as she pushed the door open. A blinding light flooded the chamber. She shielded her eyes. When she lowered her hands, she found herself in a vast room, unlike anything before. The walls shimmered with gold leaf, cracked and peeling like dried skin. Tall arched windows lined the far side, but outside was not a forest or night, it was a sprawling cityscape, lit by thousands of flickering lights, endless and alive beneath a blood-red sky. The air was thick with the scent of rain and smoke. Nina stepped forward, the floor beneath her feet cool and smooth, marble, cracked in places but still magnificent. A grand staircase spiraled up toward a ceiling lost in shadow. At the center of the room, a massive clock tower loomed, its hands spinning backward, ticking with a deafening sound that echoed through her bones. Suddenly, a voice called from above. "Welcome back, Nina." She turned, heart pounding. There, at the top of the stairs, stood a woman in a flowing black dress. Her hair was silver, eyes shining with a cruel intelligence. "You've come far," the woman said, descending slowly. "But this is only the beginning." Nina's grip tightened on the red key. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I am the house's voice. Its memory. Its will." She gestured to the spinning clock. "Time here is a lie. A loop. You can leave this room, but the house will always find you." Nina swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" The woman's smile deepened. "To join us. To become part of the endless story the house tells itself. To whisper your memories back into its walls." The clock struck midnight. And as the sound echoed, the room began to shift. Walls melted into glass, revealing shadows moving just beyond the windows. Figures with hollow eyes, reaching hands. Whispers turning to screams. The woman stepped closer. "Choose, Nina. Become the voice, or become the silence." Nina's mind reeled. She glanced at the red key in her hand. It pulsed. She felt the pull of the house's hunger. The cold, the whispers, the endless hunger. And then, deep inside, a flicker of defiance. She stepped forward. Nina's footsteps echoed loudly on the marble floor as she ascended the grand spiral staircase. The walls around her shimmered faintly, like the surface of a disturbed pool, warping and twisting her reflection in impossible ways. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as though she was climbing not just stairs, but layers of time itself. The air grew colder, biting at her skin. The distant ticking of the colossal clock below became a relentless heartbeat, pounding in her ears with maddening rhythm. The numbers on the clock face blurred and shifted, spinning backward and forward with no pattern she could follow. At the top of the staircase, she reached a narrow corridor lined with portraits. The faces in the paintings were unfamiliar, yet each bore a haunting resemblance to Nina, different ages, different expressions, but all eyes watching, judging, accusing. She paused before one particularly worn canvas. It depicted a young girl standing alone in a forest, her back turned, looking toward a dark, looming house. Nina's breath caught. It was her, or at least the version of herself from a forgotten time, shrouded in mist and shadow. Suddenly, the painting rippled, as if it were made of liquid. The image shifted, revealing a hidden doorway behind it. Nina hesitated, then pushed the portrait aside, revealing a narrow door. It creaked open to a swirling vortex of darkness, cold and endless. A whisper drifted from within. "Step through, and face what lies beneath the surface of memory." Summoning every ounce of courage, Nina stepped forward and crossed the threshold. She plunged into a swirling void, sensations of falling and floating intertwining until she landed hard on damp earth. Around her stretched an endless forest, twisted and silent under a moonless sky. The trees were gnarled and ancient, their branches reaching like grasping hands. The air was thick with the scent of decay and old secrets. As Nina moved through the underbrush, the forest seemed to close in, shadows flickering at the edges of her vision. She could hear distant cries, the sound of children laughing and crying all at once, mingling with the rustle of leaves. Suddenly, she came upon a clearing. In its center stood a solitary figure, a young girl with tangled hair and a faded blue dress, the same one from room 7. The girl looked up, eyes hollow yet pleading. "You came back," she whispered. Nina knelt, reaching out. "Who are you?" The girl smiled sadly. "I'm the part of you left behind." Tears welled in Nina's eyes. "I'm sorry." The girl's smile faded. "It's too late for sorry." Behind the girl, shadows lengthened and twisted, coalescing into monstrous shapes with eyes like burning coals. The whispering grew into a chorus of voices chanting, "Stay! Stay! Stay!" Nina stood, heart racing, the red key burning hot in her pocket. She knew the forest was a trap, a maze of memories and nightmares. But beyond it lay the truth she sought. Steeling herself, she stepped forward into the darkness, ready to face whatever lay hidden beneath the house's twisted story. The forest seemed to breathe around Nina, alive with shadows and whispers. Every step she took stirred the dead leaves, their brittle crackle loud in the heavy silence. The tangled branches overhead blocked what little moonlight there was, turning the world into a suffocating cage of darkness. The girl in the faded blue dress watched her silently, eyes like deep wells of sorrow and warning. She didn't speak again, but her presence was a constant reminder of the parts of Nina that had been left behind, lost pieces buried deep in forgotten memories and unspoken fears. Nina pressed forward, heart pounding, senses alert to every rustle and distant cry. The forest floor suddenly gave way beneath her feet, and she plunged down into cold earth, landing hard on damp soil in a narrow tunnel carved beneath the roots of an ancient tree. The air was thick and musty, heavy with the scent of mold and decay. Water dripped steadily from the roots above, echoing like slow footsteps in the dark. Nina's hands searched blindly along the rough earthen walls as she struggled to stand. Ahead, faint light flickered, not from the moon or stars, but from a ring of candles encircling an old wooden door set into the earth. The door was ancient, blackened with age, carved with symbols that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Nina approached, the red key burning hot in her pocket. She pulled it out, feeling its weight and heat in her palm. The whispers returned, soft at first, then rising into a chorus of voices chanting in an ancient tongue, urging her forward and warning her away at the same time. She paused, breath catching in her throat. The door creaked open on its own. Beyond was a room of roots and bones. The walls pulsed with slow life, the roots twisting like veins around the bones of forgotten creatures and memories. In the center stood a figure, tall and thin, draped in shadow, with eyes glowing a cold, distant blue. It spoke without moving its lips. "Welcome, Nina. You have come far, but this is where the house reveals its true hunger." Nina swallowed hard, clutching the key tighter. "What do you want from me?" The figure's gaze pierced through her. "To tether you to the house's soul. To feed it with your memories, your fears, your very essence." The roots writhed, reaching toward Nina like living things hungry for her touch. She backed away, but the door slammed shut behind her. The chanting grew louder. Nina's mind raced. She knew the house wanted to trap her forever, to swallow her whole and whisper her story back into its endless maze. But she was not ready to give in. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. And with a sudden resolve, she plunged the red key into the heart of the wooden door. A blinding light exploded. The roots writhed in pain. The shadowed figure screamed, a sound like breaking glass and rusted chains. And then, silence. When Nina opened her eyes, she was alone. The door was gone. The tunnel collapsed behind her. And the forest was silent. But she knew the house had not finished with her. It never would. Nina stumbled out of the collapsing tunnel, coughing as dust and earth filled the air. The forest greeted her not with whispers, but with an eerie, suffocating silence. The trees stood still, their twisted branches frozen in place as if time itself had stopped breathing. The moon, barely a sliver in the dark sky, cast a pale light that filtered through the thick canopy above, painting the ground with fractured shadows. Her boots pressed against damp leaves and cold soil, each step muffled and cautious. The familiar chorus of nocturnal creatures, the hoot of owls, the rustle of small animals, was absent. The forest held its breath. Nina's heart hammered in her chest as she scanned the darkness. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the house's presence pulsing, like a dormant beast waiting to awaken. The girl in the faded blue dress stood silently a few feet away, watching her with hollow eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless lost years. She did not move or speak, but Nina felt her gaze like a cold hand on her skin. Suddenly, a sharp snap echoed behind her. Nina whipped around. The sound was too deliberate, too loud to be an accident. Her breath caught. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. Not the twisted monsters she had imagined, but pale, translucent shapes, the lost souls the house had swallowed. Their faces were blurred, features indistinct, but their eyes glowed faintly with sorrow and longing. They reached out to her, fingers trembling like the last threads of a forgotten dream. "Help us," they whispered in unison. Nina felt a wave of overwhelming sorrow crash over her. These were the remnants of all those trapped before her, echoes of lives stolen by the house. She stepped forward, determination hardening inside her like steel. "I will find a way to free you," she promised, voice steady despite the tremble in her heart. The figures nodded, fading slowly back into the shadows, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Nina knew the path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers she could not yet imagine. But the red key burned in her pocket, a beacon, a burden, a promise. And somewhere beyond the silent trees, a faint light flickered. The house was waiting. And Nina would face it, whatever it took. Nina's footsteps pressed softly into the forest floor, the silence around her as thick as a fog that threatened to swallow her whole. The figures she had seen, the lost souls, were gone now, their whispered pleas still echoing faintly in the recesses of her mind. But the forest remained empty, breathless, and still. Every shadow seemed alive, lurking just beyond the edge of vision. She pulled her coat tighter around her as a cold breeze slithered through the trees, carrying with it a scent of damp earth and something metallic, sharp. Her heart beat loudly, echoing in the silence like a warning drum. Then, ahead, a faint light flickered, small and distant, like a candle struggling against the dark. She moved toward it, each step deliberate but hesitant. The light came from a small cabin nestled between two ancient oaks, its windows glowing with warm, flickering firelight. It was the first sign of life she'd seen since falling into this endless nightmare. Nina approached the cabin cautiously. The door was slightly ajar, creaking gently in the wind. Inside, the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, revealing a room filled with relics and strange artifacts. Old clocks ticked on shelves, their hands moving backward. Stacks of books lay open, their pages filled with writing that shifted and changed before her eyes. A figure sat by the fire, a man, hunched and worn, his eyes reflecting the flames like twin coals. He looked up as Nina entered. "Ah," he said softly. "You've come." Nina's breath caught. "Who are you?" "I am a keeper," he replied, voice low and steady. "Like you, once caught in the house's web. I've learned to move between its shadows." He gestured to the room. This place is a sanctuary. A pause between moments. But the house is always near. Nina looked around, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in. What happens next? She asked. The keeper's eyes darkened. You must find the heart of the house. It's there that the hunger begins and ends. But be warned, many who seek it never return. He handed her a small lantern, its light steady and true. This will guide you through the darkest paths. But it will also show you things you may wish to forget. Nina took the lantern, feeling its warmth against the cold creeping into her bones. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The house was watching. And Nina's journey was far from over. The lantern's glow flickered softly in Nina's hands, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted around the small cabin. Outside, the silent forest seemed to lean closer, its breath cold against the window panes. Nina took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the keeper's words settle heavily in her chest. The heart of the house. The place where the endless hunger began, and perhaps, where it might finally end. With the lantern lighting her path, Nina stepped out into the night. The cabin's door closed behind her with a soft thud, sealing the sanctuary away like a fragile secret. The forest around her was alive with whispers now, voices rising and falling like a dark tide. Some were pleading, some accusing, all weaving together into a haunting melody that echoed in her mind. She followed the flickering light of her lantern deeper into the woods. The trees grew taller and closer, their branches entwining overhead to form a near impenetrable canopy. The ground beneath her feet became softer, almost sponge-like, as if the forest itself was breathing and shifting. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time had become meaningless here. Then, through the thick tangle of trees, Nina saw it, a structure rising from the earth like a dark crown. The house. It was more immense and terrifying than she had imagined. Towering spires twisted toward the sky, windows glowing faintly with unnatural light. The walls seemed to pulse, alive with a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. She felt the red key warm in her pocket, pulsing in time with the house. Approaching the front door, Nina hesitated. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a storm. She placed her hand on the door's cold surface. It opened without a sound. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and forgotten memories. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, lined with doors on either side. Each door was a story, a secret, a fragment of those lost to the house. Nina's footsteps echoed softly as she moved forward. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the corridor, extinguishing her lantern. Darkness swallowed her whole. In the silence, a voice whispered directly into her mind. "Welcome home." Nina's heart froze. She was not alone. The house had waited. And now, it was ready to claim her. Darkness swallowed Nina as the flicker of her lantern vanished, leaving her alone in the endless corridor. The air was thick, heavy like a suffocating fog that clung to her skin and filled her lungs. The silence was absolute, no creak of floorboards, no distant howl, just the pounding of her own heart, loud and unsteady. Yet the silence was broken by something else, a whisper, soft and serpentine, curling around her like smoke. "You cannot run. You cannot hide." The voices multiplied, layering atop one another, each tone distinct yet harmonizing into a chilling choir. They seemed to seep from the walls themselves, pressing close, filling the space with secrets and lies. Nina's fingers brushed along the cold wooden doorframes, rough and splintered beneath her touch. Each door seemed to pulse, alive with unseen energy. She could almost feel the stories trapped behind them, memories frozen in time, waiting for release or revenge. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom, revealing faint glimmers of movement just beyond the threshold of each doorway. Shadows shifted like living things, teasing and beckoning her deeper into the house's labyrinth. She reached the first door on her left, the wood scarred and cracked, as though clawed by desperate hands. With trembling hands, Nina turned the rusted handle and pushed the door open. Inside was a room bathed in a sickly yellow light. The walls were covered with peeling wallpaper patterned with roses, now faded and torn. A single bed sat in the center, its sheets tangled and stained. On the bed lay a doll, a porcelain figure with cracked cheeks and glassy eyes staring unblinking into the dark. As Nina stepped closer, the doll's eyes seemed to follow her, gleaming with a malevolent intelligence. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. The whispers grew louder, filling the room until they drowned out all other sounds. "Stay with us. Stay forever." Nina's breath hitched as cold fingers brushed her skin. She spun around, but the room was empty. Heart racing, she grabbed the doll and threw it against the wall. It shattered into pieces, but the whispers did not stop. With no other choice, Nina pushed open a hidden panel in the far wall, revealing a narrow passageway cloaked in darkness. She stepped through, the air growing colder, the whispers fading to distant echoes. Ahead, a faint light glimmered, a promise or a trap, she could not tell. But Nina knew she had to keep moving. The house was alive. And it was watching. Waiting. Nina's footsteps echoed softly as she moved through the narrow passage, the walls pressing close, damp and cold to the touch. The faint glow ahead flickered uncertainly, casting long, wavering shadows that danced and twisted like ghosts in the gloom. Every breath she took was sharp, crisp with the chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small alcoves where ancient objects lay half buried in dust and cobwebs, broken clocks frozen at midnight, faded photographs of faces she did not recognize, letters written in a trembling hand, their ink blurred and smeared by time. Whispers floated along the air, barely audible but persistent, like the echo of a nightmare refusing to fade. Remember. Forget. Belong. Nina pressed on, clutching the red key tightly in her hand. It pulsed softly, warm and steady, a faint heartbeat guiding her deeper into the unknown. Suddenly, the passage opened into a vast chamber unlike anything she had seen before. The ceiling soared into darkness, lost to shadow, while the floor was a mosaic of shattered glass and cracked tiles, glinting under the lantern's glow. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of smoke. At the center of the chamber stood a grand, ornate mirror, its frame gilded and curling with intricate patterns of twisting vines and thorns. The glass itself was clouded and foggy, reflecting not the chamber, but something else entirely. Nina approached cautiously, her reflection slowly coming into focus. But as she looked closer, the image shifted. Instead of herself, she saw a figure, a woman draped in shadow, face obscured but eyes glowing with cold fire. The figure raised a hand, beckoning. Nina's breath caught. Suddenly, the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. The chamber walls began to close in, the air growing thick and suffocating. She stepped back, heart pounding, but the figure in the mirror smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. And then, without warning, the glass shattered, sending shards flying like razor teeth. Nina ducked, clutching the key, as the shards swirled around her, cutting through the air. When the last piece fell, the chamber was plunged into darkness once more. And the whispers, soft, insistent, eternal, began anew. Stay with us. Stay forever. The darkness settled around Nina like a thick blanket, suffocating and endless. The shards of the shattered mirror lay scattered at her feet, glittering faintly in the dim light of her dwindling lantern. Each fragment caught a sliver of the room, a distorted, broken glimpse of the chamber she had just escaped. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The cruel smile of the shadowed figure lingered in her mind, an imprint she could not erase. A low hum began to grow, vibrating through the very air and stone of the chamber. It rose steadily, a dreadful chorus that filled the silence with a weight that pressed down on her chest. The whispers morphed into voices, voices of those lost, trapped forever within the house's labyrinth. Come back. Stay forever. Don't leave us. Nina's hands trembled as she gripped the red key, which now seemed to burn hotter, almost alive with urgency. She knew she could not linger here, not with the house's hunger growing stronger with each passing second. Ahead, the far wall shimmered, like a veil of heat rising from the floor. Slowly, it rippled and parted, revealing a narrow passage carved directly into the stone. Beyond the opening lay darkness, an abyss that seemed to swallow the weak light. Nina took a deep breath, steeling herself against the fear that clawed at her throat, and stepped into the passage. The air grew colder with each step, biting through her clothes, chilling her to the bone. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls close and unyielding, pressing in on her from all sides. The whispers returned, softer now but no less insistent. You can't escape. You belong here. A sudden gust of icy wind blew through the passage, extinguishing her lantern. Nina was plunged into absolute darkness. Her heart raced. She fumbled in her pocket, clutching the red key tightly. The key itself emitted a faint glow, enough to guide her trembling hands as she moved forward. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, where the faint outlines of countless doors stretched into shadowy infinity. Each door bore a name, etched in fading gold script, names Nina recognized as the lost souls she had seen before. She reached out to a door labeled Evelyn. The door creaked open, revealing a small room filled with the scent of lavender and old paper. On a dusty desk lay a diary, its pages yellowed and brittle. Nina's fingers brushed the cover, and the voices filled her ears again, this time, memories flooding her mind in vivid flashes. She saw Evelyn, a young woman trapped in the house long ago, desperately trying to find a way out, only to lose herself in the endless corridors of fear and despair. The door slammed shut behind her. Nina gasped, but the diary remained open on the desk, inviting her to read. She knew that every story she uncovered was a thread, a part of the house's tapestry. And somewhere within these stories lay the secret to escape. But the house did not want to be unraveled. And it would fight to keep its secrets forever. Nina's fingers trembled as she reached for the fragile diary resting on the desk. The worn leather cover was cracked and faded, the edges curled and brittle like dried leaves. She hesitated for a moment, then carefully opened it, the ancient pages releasing a faint musty scent, a mixture of dust, time, and forgotten memories. As she began to read, the room around her seemed to dissolve. The walls faded into shadow, replaced by vivid scenes that played out like ghostly projections, shadows cast on invisible walls. She saw a woman, Evelyn, young, full of hope, yet trapped in a cycle of endless wandering through the house's shifting halls. Evelyn's voice echoed softly, telling of her desperate search for a way out. Every door leads to another room, another corridor. I can't tell where the walls end or where the floor begins. I hear the whispers, feel the eyes watching me. But no one answers. No one saves. Nina's chest tightened with empathy. Evelyn's story was her story, repeated over and over by every soul the house had claimed. Suddenly, the shadows shifted. Nina felt a cold breath on her neck and spun around. The room was empty. But the diary's pages fluttered wildly, as if caught in a storm. Words began to rearrange themselves on the pages. Find the heart, break the cycle, or be lost forever. The door creaked open slowly behind her. Nina's heart hammered. She closed the diary and stepped through. The hallway stretched out before her, lined with doors that seemed to whisper her name. She moved forward, the weight of the house's hunger pressing closer with every step. But somewhere, deep in the twisting corridors, she knew the truth waited. The heart of the house. Nina moved forward through the endless corridor, her footsteps soft but steady against the cold stone floor. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp wood and forgotten fears. Each door she passed whispered faintly, as if trying to pull her inside, begging her to stop and listen to their stories. But Nina's resolve was firm. She had come too far to be trapped by whispers now. The red key burned warmly in her pocket, a steady pulse that seemed to guide her deeper into the maze. The walls around her began to shift imperceptibly, narrowing and twisting like the insides of some great, slumbering beast. Shadows pooled in the corners, writhing and stretching, their forms flickering like dying flames. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. At its center stood a grand, ornate door unlike any Nina had seen before. Its surface was black as night, carved with strange symbols that shimmered faintly in the gloom. The door was massive, framed by twisted pillars that seemed to pulse with an inner life. Nina approached cautiously, heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the red key, its heat intensifying in her hand. As she moved to insert it into the door's lock, the air around her shimmered and rippled. The whispering voices crescendoed into a thunderous chorus, echoing through the chamber with terrible clarity. You cannot escape. You belong to us. Nina's hands shook, but she forced the key into the lock. It turned with a grinding sound, the door slowly creaking open to reveal a swirling vortex of darkness and light, a void filled with memories, fears, and shadows. She stepped forward, the swirling energies pulling at her very soul. Images flashed before her eyes, faces of lost souls, twisted and broken reflections of herself, fragments of memories she thought long forgotten. The vortex whispered secrets, promises, and threats all at once. It offered escape, but at a terrible price. Nina felt herself slipping, caught between the lure of oblivion and the desperate need to survive. Her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke into the void. I will not be your prisoner. A sudden burst of light erupted from the key, flooding the chamber and casting the swirling darkness into retreat. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving her alone in silence once more. But Nina knew the house was far from defeated. The labyrinth's heart had been revealed. And the final battle was only just beginning. Nina stood in the silent chamber, the echoes of the closing door ringing like a warning bell in the stillness. Her breath came in ragged gasps, heart pounding with a fierce mixture of fear and determination. The red key, now cool in her palm, felt both like a weapon and a chain, a symbol of her desperate fight against the house's endless hunger. All around her, the shadows shifted and writhed, dark tendrils creeping from the cracks in the walls, reaching out like living things desperate to reclaim what they had lost. The air grew heavy with a low hum, a sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the house itself, a terrible pulse that threatened to overwhelm her senses. From the shadows emerged the keeper of doors, his eyes burning with a cold, unyielding light. His presence was both familiar and terrifying, a reminder of the cost of her journey and the price she might pay if she failed. You have come far, Nina, he said, voice echoing like distant thunder. But the house does not forgive. It does not forget. And it never lets go. Nina squared her shoulders, clutching the key tightly. "I will break the cycle," she said, voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I will end this." The keeper's eyes narrowed, and the shadows surged forward, engulfing the chamber in darkness. Nina felt herself pulled into a whirlwind of memories and fears, scenes from her past and those lost to the house, intertwined in a chaotic storm of light and shadow. Voices whispered promises and threats, laughter and cries, all blending into a haunting symphony that threatened to drown her. But within the storm, Nina found a center, a still point of clarity and strength. She raised the red key high, its glow brightening until it pierced the darkness like a blade of fire. With a cry, she plunged the key into the heart of the chamber, a glowing orb of shadow and light suspended in the air. The house screamed, a sound of breaking glass and tearing fabric, as the orb shattered, releasing a wave of light that swept through the labyrinth, dissolving shadows and silence alike. When the light faded, Nina found herself standing alone in a quiet forest clearing. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and rain. The oppressive weight of the house was gone, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. She sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. The house was broken. But the memories remained, a reminder of all she had lost, and all she had saved. And as dawn broke over the horizon, Nina knew her story was only beginning. The first light of dawn stretched across the horizon like a tentative promise, painting the sky with soft strokes of amber and rose. Nina knelt in the forest clearing, the cool earth beneath her hands grounding her after the whirlwind she had endured. The oppressive silence that had clung to her since entering the house was lifted, replaced by the gentle symphony of nature awakening, birds calling to one another, leaves rustling in a tender breeze, and the distant murmur of a stream. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the quiet wash over her, letting her ragged breath slow, the pounding in her chest settle. The house, that relentless, living nightmare, was broken, shattered by the power of the red key and her own unyielding will. But the victory felt bittersweet. The memories of those lost within its walls, the endless cycles of fear and despair, still lingered in the corners of her mind, whispering like ghosts at the edge of consciousness. She thought of the countless souls who had come before her, trapped and forgotten, their stories folded into the house's cruel tapestry. Each of them was a thread she had unraveled, a voice she had freed. Evelyn's diary, the lost children in the silent forest, the shadowed figures behind shattered mirrors, they were not just echoes, but pieces of herself, fragments of a past she had been forced to confront. Slowly, Nina rose, brushing the damp leaves from her clothes. The red key, now cool and inert, rested quietly in her palm. It had served its purpose, but its magic had waned. She knew she could never return to that place, not because she feared it, but because some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. As she walked toward the edge of the clearing, the forest seemed to breathe around her, alive with renewed energy. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the ground with warm patterns. For the first time in what felt like forever, Nina felt the weight of hope. But even in this newfound peace, a whisper lingered, softer than before, almost like a sigh carried on the wind. "We are still here." Nina paused, her heart tightening. The house might have been broken, its hunger quelled, but the shadows it cast would never fully disappear. They lived on in memories, in fears, in the quiet moments when the world seemed still and dark. She looked up at the rising sun, determination hardening in her eyes. Her journey had changed her, made her stronger, more aware of the fragile line between light and darkness. She had faced the house's hunger and refused to become a part of its endless story. And now, she was free. But freedom was not the end. It was a beginning. Nina took a deep breath, stepping forward into the new day. The house was behind her. But the whispers would always be with her.